Welcome to Ethics in Public Service. The learning objectives of this presentation are to learn 3 normative ethical theories, learn ethical dilemmas in public administration, learn the steps in making an ethical decision. Ethics, morals, and virtues are often used interchangeably. However, they are distinctly different. Ethics refers to the rules of accountability provided by external sources such as codes of conduct, business codes of conduct, military codes of conduct, and the Code of Ethics for the American Society of Public Administration are all examples. Morals refer to an individual's principles of right and wrong. They can either be individual and personal, or they might apply within a group or a society. Virtues place emphasis on character deepened by habits or repetition to achieve moral excellence.
This is a course about justice, and we begin with a story. Suppose you're the driver of a trolley car, and your trolley car is hurtling down the track at 60 miles an hour, and at the end of the track you notice 5 workers working on the track. You try to stop, but you can't. Your brakes don't work. You feel desperate because you know that if you crash into these 5 workers, they will all die. Let's assume you know that for sure. And so you feel helpless until you notice that there is, off to the right, a side track. And at the end of that track, there's one worker working on the track. Your steering wheel works, so you can turn the trolley car, if you want to, onto the side track, killing the one, but sparing the 5. Here's our first question. What's the right thing to do? What would you do?
Ethical dilemmas in public administration are about those in service, whether government leaders or employees, acting in the best interest of the public. Through fair and unbiased actions, those in service must put the interest of others before their own self-interest. A dilemma is a circumstance which demands a decision be made in spite of moral conflicts and with the understanding that one solution might undermine another. Researcher Anthony Macrodemetros in 2002 noted, "The basic aim would not be the triumph of one principle over another, but the reduction of incongruence among them in the provision of conditions for their harmonious coexistence, mutual support, and complementary fulfillment. This is the essence of a dilemma as opposed to a problem." Dinhard, and Blanc, in their 2014 text, discussed the part administrative responsibility plays in administration ethics. One must operate as efficiently as possible while still maintaining responsiveness to superiors, the legislature, the citizenry, and the principles of democratic governance generally. This responsibility is said to be objective because it relates to expectations imposed from outside oneself. Additionally, there is subjective responsibility, which relates to expectations we might have of ourselves. We have core values and beliefs. Some call it our moral compass. Clearly, many ethical dilemmas in public administration are a struggle between these 2 types of responsibilities, objective versus subjective. Ethical dilemmas arrive at the doorstep of those in public service every day. Some examples include conflicts of interest, when personal interests collide with the obligations of the public office. Many of these conflicts are financial and include actions such as accepting gifts, misusing federal property, outside employment, or using one's position for financial gain. Administrative discretion. Administrators have discretion to make decisions which should promote the general welfare of others. Public officials must carefully choose the path which adheres to rules, regulations, and procedures. Confidentiality has importance because exposing certain information could set off unruliness, corruption, and unfair advantage. Whistleblowing. The whistleblower reveals the erroneous actions within the government to expose fraud, waste, or abuse. Famous whistleblowers of relatively current times include Daniel Ellsberg and Edward Snowden.
It's a very difficult and kind of complex question because I typically don't classify people. I don't like the whistleblower terminology, the hero terminology, or traitor terminology. Anything where we're otherizing people, it creates distance between them. But if we want to think about the general behaviors that people share, the general choices that they make, I think it ultimately comes down to, you see a structure of laws where the legality of the times are becoming more and more divorced from the morality of our daily lives, the daily decision making, the sort of values we hold. And when we have that, you ultimately have to make a choice about what do you have a greater commitment to, the law or to justice. And that's what being a whistleblower is about to me.
Daniel, do you share that view? What was going through your mind back in 1971 when you took that decision to go up against the US government over Vietnam?
Well, I feel a great identity with Edward Snowden. I think a whistleblower tends to be an insider who has been aware for some time, often, and been silent about abuses or injustices, crimes, lies, like many of his colleagues have been aware. And there comes a time when he or she realizes it's wrong to continue to be silent, to hold these secrets away from the outsiders who are being harmed by the secrecy of that information.
And now we will discuss the steps for making ethical decisions. First, clarify the facts. Those involved must first classify the components of the dilemma, stating them clearly and concisely, all the while being careful to separate perception from reality to alleviate preconceived or prejudicial ideation. Second, agree on basic principles to make sure that opinions do not get in the way of the goals, and broad moral values are the basis for continued deliberation. Third, analyze the arguments. What are the various viewpoints and counter-arguments? Is the reasoning cogent or fallacious? Is it based on a premise appropriate to the situation? Examine what logically flows from the first two steps of facts and principles. Diagnose problems which might result from the alternative solution being weighed. And finally, make a decision and act on it, keeping in mind that dilemmas are often a balancing act of solutions. Implementation is not a closed door, but the beginning of evaluation to monitor the outcomes and make adjustments. Often this means the final step of making a decision loops back to the first step of assessing the facts. Each of the three normative ethical theories, deontology, utilitarianism, and virtue ethics, has shortcomings within a given situation, thus highlighting contextual importance. Deontology and utilitarianism are based on actions and outcomes, and virtue ethics is determined by a person's internal value system. To expand, deontology, sometimes called Kant ethics after Immanuel Kant, the originator of this theory, is the obligation or duty approach to ethics. This means a person will follow his or her obligations and duties when analyzing an ethical dilemma. Also, a person will follow his or her obligation to another individual or society because upholding one's duty is ethically correct. A lecturer from Benedictine University discusses the nature of deontology.
So what is deontological ethics? What is duty ethics? Well, it was pioneered by Immanuel Kant, one of the giants in philosophy. If you major in philosophy, you will read his work. And he lived in what is now Kaliningrad in Russia. Back then it was Königsberg, Prussia, a major Baltic city, a major Hanseatic city. And he lived there all of his life. He never left the city, between 1724 to 1804. And this towering intellect argued that moral acts are either right or wrong on principle. In other words, there are acts that are intrinsically always right or always wrong on principle, and that we have a duty to do good no matter the circumstance.
Utilitarianism theory states that the moral worth of an action is determined by the outcome. The best moral action is the one that maximizes utility, or the end justifies the means. This approach is the least used in public administration because implementing the greatest good for the greatest number is difficult. English philosopher Jeremy Bentham, considered to be the founder of utilitarianism, is discussed in this excerpt from a lecture by Michael Sandel from Harvard University.
Bentham arrives at this principle by the following line of reasoning. We're all governed by pain and pleasure. They are our sovereign masters, and so any moral system has to take account of them. How best to take account? By maximizing. And this leads to the principle of the greatest good for the greatest number. What exactly should we maximize? Bentham tells us happiness, or more precisely, utility. Maximizing utility is a principle not only for individuals, but also for communities and for legislators. What, after all, is a community? Bentham asks. It's the sum of the individuals who comprise it. And that's why, in deciding the best policy, in deciding what the law should be, in deciding what's just, citizens and legislators should ask themselves the question, if we add up all of the benefits of this policy and subtract all of the costs, the right thing to do is the one that maximizes the balance of happiness over suffering. That's what it means to maximize utility.
The third normative theory I will discuss is virtue ethics. The founding fathers of virtue ethics are Plato and Aristotle. Virtue ethics focuses on the nature of the agent as a determining factor in analyzing ethical conduct. A person is judged by their character rather than by an action that may stray from normal behavior. Virtues are attitudes, dispositions, or character traits that enable us to be and to act in ways that develop the potential for ideals. Included in virtue ethics are standards to be achieved, such as excellence. Let's listen to this professor from the University of Oklahoma discuss the nature of virtue ethics.
Virtue ethics is the name we give to a way of understanding morality that focuses on persons and what it takes to live a good life, rather than on principles for distinguishing right acts from wrong acts. Virtue ethicists care about doing the right thing, but that is because they care about living well, and acting rightly is necessary for living well. Acting wrongly debases the well-being of the individual or the community.
Suppose it is obvious that someone in need should be helped. A deontologist will point to the fact that upholding one's duty is the ethically correct thing to do. A utilitarian will decide how to help the most people for the most good, and the virtue ethicist will point to the fact that helping the person is charitable and benevolent.